CFR Network, CFR News. Good day, good night, all. Shalom, balance, paradise, ni hao, hola, ni hao, all of the universal greetings. Glad to be back, diligently working hard in the lab. A special guest from an undisclosed location. As you can see, I have with me none other than Mark Windows. Welcome to the broadcaster.
Well, thanks for having me on.
You're very most welcome. I gave you a very brief introduction, so I will allow you to elaborate further. But I just out the gate, I will say everybody go over to windowsunderworld.net, which has a plethora and wealth of resources on there, and also the weekly broadcast which Mark does as well. But yes, please take it away, sir. Please fill in all of the blanks.
Well, there's a lot of blanks to fill, really, if you put it like that, because it depends on where you want to jump in and what you want to talk about, really.
Well, for the untrained ear,
Yes.
you are clearly a critical thinker. You have produced a lot of work. So just give a brief synopsis of the types of media and work that you've done and what you're currently sort of into at the moment.
Yeah, sure. I originally started off in music and doing an act, really. I was like a club act for years. And I was also into researching, and I'd always been into research. And that started to take over more and more. And I started a website years ago called landofthefree.co.uk, which is not there anymore. But we were looking into the sort of obvious corruption that was going on, the way that the courts were becoming more administrative. And it seemed that there was a new system of law replacing the old system of law. Now, that might sound really confusing, but actually, when I looked into it, and it took me quite a while, I realized that the whole way that we are governed had completely changed, and it's certainly not what most people think it is. So that led me into really in-depth research about social engineering, the history, especially of Britain, and its dominance and the reason for its dominance, and also what is behind what is really going on, because there's always two things going on. There's the cover story and there's what's going on behind that, the real and the stated goals.
Mm-hmm.
And this was actually brought up in, if you can look on the website, you'll find a article, and it's called the Order of New Barbarians. And it was about a speech that was given by a Dr. Richard Day in 1969. He worked for what became the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It was called Planned Parenthood and still is an arm of it. And he was saying that society was going to be completely re-engineered in quite a disturbing way. And they were going to use all these psychological tools to basically bully people into this new system. And by the time we get up to the sort of late 80s, a document came out. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that happened in between this time, but I'm just giving you a few reference points if people want to look on the site. There was a document that came out called Our Common Future, also known as the Brundtland Report, and it called for a new system of governance. And by 1992, at the Rio Conference, a fellow called Maurice Strong, who headed the United Nations Conference on the Committee on the Environment and Development, UNCED, he got more and more promoted within the UN. He was actually an oil billionaire. And from him and the Rio Summit of 92, we get the new driver of change, which is climate change, which became global warming, and now it's a climate emergency and a climate crisis. But all of these things are drivers of change for a new system that's being brought in. So in a nutshell, that's the sort of thing that I've been covering, along with some sort of historical tangents. Recently, I put out a film called The Heretics of London, the Smithfield Martyrs. It was about people burned at the stake in the 1600s under Henry VIII to Mary I. And it came about by my visiting a place just outside the old city walls in London the City of London, and it's called Smithfield.
Hmm.
So that's my most recent kind of release, really. But alongside that, I do a show every Sunday, and I put out this sort of information which can basically help people to see behind what's going on.
Yes, to kind of peek behind the veil of sorts and uh, discover that there's just a little man behind this big machine of sorts, or a group of little men and women controlling and pulling the strings.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's for people who don't know about how things are steered, it's actually quite difficult to understand, and that I really do kind of sympathize with that, because when I talk to people who aren't aware of this system of governance that is being used in pretty much every country in the world now, they still go back to it's the Tories or it's Labour, or they're
Yeah,
conditioned to think in terms of political parties, in
indeed.
terms of left and right. But the left and right is a distraction, because
Yes.
it doesn't matter. They're all on board with this sustainable development, which is basically control and management of all resources and people on the planet. It's a
Yes.
control system done through the environmental
Guys.
kind of excuse. Yes, exactly.
Mm, hmm hmm. It's very I guess for let's look at it from the youngsters' standpoint. You know, the youngsters who were born in maybe 2000 moving forwards. With the social engineering, the propaganda, the television series, the films, all of those bits and pieces are subtly programming them into this flustered state of we have what was it? Was it 13 years before we were at a point of no return, 23 years, and we're no longer going to be human beings. And they've really bought totally into this. They're at a fever pitch where they're joining all of these different various groups and organizations, which if you look at the roots of where the funding of these organizations come from, you kind of think to yourself that it's it's kind of nonsensical of sorts. And then to also
Well,
think, as
yeah.
human beings, I mean, pollution is real. That's something that we need to most definitely look at. Pollution of the planet, the overuse of these plastics, which leach into so many different aspects of food, etc. Rather than looking at that, they're talking about this, as you say, the change from global warming to now climate change and us reducing carbon